Last day's lesson we looked at reproduction, and it was basically an introduction to reproduction, and we said that in the plant and animal world that there were two major ways by which animals and plants can reproduce. One of them is what we call sexual reproduction, which involves male and female parents producing gametes. Now, gametes are cells that have half the normal amount of genetic information, and those two gametes then fuse. They form a zygote. That zygote is the immediate result of fertilisation, and then that zygote re-establishes the full complement of chromosomes, and then it begins to develop and divide and change, and it builds itself up into one full unique organism. Okay. The second way we said was a method called asexual reproduction. Now, in biology, chemistry, physics, and all the sciences, maths as well, if something begins with the letter A, it means without. So therefore, asexual reproduction means without the need for parents, okay, without the need for male and female gametes. So therefore, what happens? Well, a part of the original parent can break off and go and basically thrive on its own, but the difference is that this will be genetically identical to the parent, okay? That's one way. They can bud, they can fragment, all right? We can actually do it in plants as well. You can take a cutting of one plant, and you may put it into rooting powder, then you may plant it, and roots will develop, all right? Now, there's two major differences, first of all, between sexual and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves the fusion of gametes. Asexual reproduction doesn't. Sexual reproduction involves giving rise to offspring who are genetically different from the parents, all right? Whereas when we talk about asexual reproduction, it involves giving offspring that are genetically identical to the parents. So what we're going to look at today is, we've used that word genetic many, many times. What does it actually mean? Your genetic information, your genetic code, is for all intents and purposes the set of instructions on which is written how to make you, or how to make any individual an individual, how to make any organism an organism, okay? So it's a code, basically. And that code is written on a very, very long string called DNA. Now, in first year, we would have spoken about the importance of the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of the cell, okay? And the reason why it's the control center of the cell is because it contains most of the cell's DNA. The most important DNA is there. Now, other things like chloroplasts and mitochondria, they have their own DNA, but this one is the DNA in the nucleus, the most important DNA. And DNA is very, very long fibers on which your code is written, okay? Now, in normal circumstances, those very long fibers are individual, and there are 46 of them in the human cell, and they're gathered together in 23 pairs. Now, I want you to think about that. 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. What happens? Well, one chromosome from the father links up with the corresponding chromosome from the mother. So that's why they exist in pairs. So you might see chromosomes always written as two straight lines. That's how they exist. 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs, okay? Those chromosomes, if we look even further into them, have sections on them that are very, very important. So over the whole length, you've got the code, but there are sections on this code that are extremely important because they control your characteristics, and they're called genes, G-E-N-E-S. That's where the word genetic comes from, okay? And these genes control things like skin color, freckles, earlobes. We'll talk about them later on, but they do control your, what we would call, genetic traits, all right? And that's what I want to look at today. How do we get these genes to express themselves, and why do they express themselves, and when they express themselves, what actually happens? So first of all, as we know, animal and plant cells contain a nucleus with long strands of DNA. Now there's an example of where they are. So you see these long bars, see they're existing in pairs. There are actually 23 pairs of chromosomes in the human cell, okay? And those 23 pairs, that's what makes up our 46 complement altogether. That's the key number for a human cell, okay? And those 23 pairs, you'll notice, they pair off in corresponding pairs. Now, just take a quick look. Look at this one here. Look at the one I've taken out. Do you see these red bars? Those red bars are the genes. That's the genetic information. So this one here might control something like your height. This one here might control something like whether you have earlobes or not. This one here might control your eye color. This one here might control whether you've got freckles or not, and so on, okay? So these genes are like pockets of information along a chromosome. And don't forget what a chromosome is. A chromosome is nothing more than a very long strand of DNA. And if we were to unravel these chromosomes, here's what we'd see. We'd see this very, very long, thin filament, which is kind of joined together, a bit like a twisted ladder. Okay, and some people describe DNA, the big long thread of DNA, as a twisted ladder. But when you put it all together, it becomes a chromosome, and on that chromosome, there are packets of information that are important, which we call genes. These long strands are coiled up into rod shapes. Now you can see them there. Okay, there are 46 of them in 23 pairs. Along these chromosomes are special regions of information called genes. Now that's the word I want to focus on today. Genes are special regions on a chromosome that control the activity of the cell. So I've just taken two chromosomes here, all right? And this one here could be from the mother, and this one here could be from the father. But that's why they pair off. So this one would have come from the mother cell's gamete, and this one would have come from the father's gamete. And when the two gametes fuse, the chromosomes all find their corresponding pair and they pair off, okay, in the new individual. Genes will influence the way an entire organism develops. So you are who you are because of genetic information that you carry. That's it, all right? Your height, your skin type, your earlobes, your being able to roll your tongue, all these things, they're all controlled by genes. They have a strong influence over things like, as we said already, eye colour, freckles, earlobe shape, and so on. And human cells have 46 chromosomes arranged into 23 pairs. And I want you to think of the pairs like this. The pairs exist in that fashion. See that? They exist as the chromosome that came from the mother's gamete and the chromosome that came from the father's gamete. So when the gametes fuse, all the chromosomes search out one another and they find the corresponding chromosomes and they settle down as a pair. So the zygote will have 23 pairs of chromosomes, or as we often say, 46 chromosomes in total. It is important to remember that gametes, the male sperm and the female egg, have half the usual number of chromosomes. Now I did this with you the last day. Okay, I'm going to do it again very quickly. A normal cell of the body is called a somatic cell. And a somatic cell would be something like a brain cell, a skin cell, a liver cell, whatever, okay? But they are not involved in reproduction. And somatic cells have 46 chromosomes. Now, only the gametes need to have half that information. So a process happens which actually divides the genetic information in half. So therefore, a somatic cell will become a gamete, like this, which will contain 23 chromosomes. Now 23 chromosomes on their own are of no use, okay? They can't develop into a new individual. So that's what I want you to think about when we're producing gametes. It's a somatic cell, an ordinary body cell that undergoes a special process, and we'll talk about that special process later on, that cuts the genetic material in half and produces two daughter cells, and those daughter cells have half the amount of genetic information. And the only thing that a gamete is good for is finding another gamete to fuse with. That's the only thing it's good for, okay? And we did say that the male gametes are the ones that are motile. They're the ones that swim. And the female gametes, which are slightly bigger, are the ones that don't move. They're pushed along. They don't move by themselves. So it's the male gamete that has to find the female gamete, okay? And we did that in the previous class. At fertilisation, we know already the two gametes, each carrying 23 chromosomes, fuse and re-establish the required 46 chromosome number. So there's what I had a moment ago. There's the 23 pairs, the 46 chromosomes in the mother. Now, the process by which gametes are formed is called meiosis. You don't have to worry about that too much, but it is the name of the process. If you take biology in 5th year and 6th year, you'll study this in great detail. But it's the way by which a cell with 46 chromosomes can split itself into two 23s, and those two 23s are gametes, okay? The male, again, normally 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs, but some of those cells undergo meiosis and they become sperm cells with 23 chromosomes. And when these two meet, they will re-establish in the zygote 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 46 chromosomes in total. Now here's the important thing. Since the new zygote has maternal and paternal, maternal means from mother, paternal means from father, so the new zygote has both maternal and paternal DNA. So think about that. There's the mother's DNA, there's the father's DNA. When they come together, you have a mix of the two in here. And it's how they mix that causes the genes to express themselves in a certain way. So because a zygote has information from both parents, the zygote won't be like either parent. They'll be like a mix of the two. They'll be a unique individual, all right? They'll have their own genetic code. They will have their own traits. They'll have their own uniqueness. So therefore, they won't be a clone of the mother. They won't be a clone of the father. But they may resemble mum and dad because, after all, they do carry half of each's DNA. Okay, so here's a question I want to ask yourself. You can try this now. Can you roll your tongue? Now, what do I mean by rolling your tongue? Look at the picture. I mean, can you turn the sides of your tongue upwards? Can you roll your tongue up into a kind of a cylinder? All right? I can. Like that. Now, some people can and some people can't. It's not a thing that you can half do. You either can roll your tongue or you can't roll your tongue. And believe it or believe it not, the ability to roll your tongue is controlled by genes. So if the gene that allows tongue rolling is being expressed in your body, then you will be able to roll your tongue. And if the gene is being repressed, then you will not be able to roll your tongue. So there's only two possibilities. I don't want to hear from anybody telling me that you could half roll your tongue. You can't. You can either roll your tongue or you cannot roll your tongue. Okay? And it's not being able to roll your R's, it's rolling your tongue. It's genetically controlled. Some people can, others can't, because tongue rolling is genetically controlled. And every individual is unique and develops in response to genetic factors and environmental factors. Now, at fertilisation, 23, 23, 46, a zygote is formed. Okay? That zygote begins to develop into the new individual. After birth, two things come into play. Number one, the genes continue to try and express themselves. But number two, the environment around them is also impacting on the development of the body. So therefore, we can say that basically from the moment of conception, there are two things, two influences over the development of a child. Number one, the genes. They will genetically control how the child develops. But number two, the environmental factors. So does the mother drink? Does the mother smoke during pregnancy? They'll have a huge influence on the development of the child. Okay? And likewise afterwards, if you carry the gene to be tall, but your diet is very, very poor and you don't take a good diet, well then, even though you have the gene to be tall, your body won't have the building blocks to allow that tallness to happen. So you've got to be very careful to remember that your development is genetic and environmental. So you need to watch after a healthy diet. We did that last year. You need to make sure you have a healthy diet. You need to make sure you've got a good hygiene regime, okay? Because these are things that do impact on the development of the body. So there's a lot going on for development of a human person. Just because, as we said already, you have genes to be tall does not mean you will automatically reach your potential height. Diet can affect your growth. And also we're told that if people smoke, there's kind of evidence out there to say that if people smoke at a young age, that the chemicals in the cigarette can have an effect on their growth, can have an effect on their metabolism, will have an effect on the development of their lungs. Okay, so please keep in mind the development of a person from conception, from the moment the zygote is formed, is twofold: genetic development, but also environmental development. Parents can also teach certain skills and values to their children, okay? But these learned behaviours do not affect the child's genetic makeup. So when you learn things, so you learn how to add, you learn how to subtract, you learn how to ride a bicycle, you learn how to fix a puncture, you learn later on how to swim, you learn how to drive a car. They're things that you're picking up. That's education. That's information you're picking up from somebody else. That is not part of your genetic makeup. Now, maybe the intelligence is, maybe the speed at which you pick it up, that could be genetically determined. But these learned things, yeah, learning to read, learning to write, they're things you have to be taught. And what I'm saying here is that the learned behaviours do not affect the child's genetic makeup. So if you take this as being your genetic makeup, okay, your genetic makeup is the most important way that the body develops, because that's the instructions that tells the cells what to do to make you you, okay? And then feeding into this, there is the environmental factors. So things like your diet, okay? Even things down to pollution, believe it or believe it not, they will also have a key impact on your development. Hence the reason why politicians are really focusing on giving us the best kind of environment we can, the cleanest environment, because they know over time that the more pollution there is, the more impact on your health, okay? The more impact on your potential to reach your best and your healthiest version of you. And then what we know is there are learned behaviours. Now, learned behaviours don't feed into genetic expression. They are things that we pick up from friends. They're things we pick up from parents. They're values we could pick up from grandparents. Okay, so for example, if your family is an avid, say, Labour supporter, then chances are that the children will pick up that and they'll become Labour supporters. Okay, so sometimes you'll find in a family that the political line is something that keeps going through the generations. That's not genetic. That's just what we would say, looking up to the adults and taking their values on your shoulders as well. Okay, let's clear that. Okay, learned behaviors are not passed on. Now, if you learn how to ride a bike, okay, that does not mean that when you have your own children, they will come out of the womb and be able to hop on a bicycle and ride it. Okay, if you learn to write, your children, when they come out of the womb, will not be able to write. You have to continuously teach successive generations how to read, how to write, how to cycle a bike, etc. So if you have to continuously teach new generations how to do things, they are not genetic. They are learned behaviours. However, if you have a grandfather who can roll his tongue, and then his daughter can roll her tongue, and then her son can roll her tongue, nobody taught them how to do that. That's something that has been expressed at cellular level, at genetic level. So we notice here that the learned behaviours we pick up, they're not passed on, but the genetic ones are. All right. So here's a couple. Now, most of you mightn't have heard of these already, but here's a couple of genetic ones I want you to check for now. First of all, we've got what's called a widow's peak. Now, sometimes you'll notice a person's hairline, okay? You're looking at me saying, widow's peak, what's that? Sometimes a person's hairline will come down like this. Right? It'll peak at the front. Now, the most important person who's a widow's peak, if anybody knows, is Dracula. Dracula has a huge widow's peak, all right? But that's the widow's peak there. It's when your hair comes down into the front into a type of a V shape. That's controlled by genes. Now, you can ask yourself, have a look in the mirror, is it present with you? Do you have it or do you not have it? Because I'm going to try and build up a little genetic profile of each of us. Okay, when you hold up your fingers, look at your last finger. In some people, your little finger is dead straight. In other people, it curves inwards. That curvature of the little finger is actually genetically controlled. So again, take a look at your hands. Do you have that genetic trait? Do you not have that genetic trait? Next one is an earlobe. Now this is interesting. An earlobe, a big fleshy thing that hangs down here. Some people get these things pierced, all right? In some people, it will come down as an earlobe and then go back up before it attaches to the head. So something like this. The ear will come out like that and it will come down and it will attach. So you get a big fleshy piece like that there. For other people, the ear will simply connect directly to the head like that. To be no earlobe. Now again, look in the mirror. Do you have an earlobe or do you not have an earlobe? And tick the box accordingly. Being able to roll your tongue, we checked that a few minutes ago. Can you roll your tongue? Can you turn the sides of your tongue upwards into a U shape? If you can, tick the present box. If you can't, tick the absent. A gap between your front teeth. Do you have a decent gap between your front teeth? Because that gap, again, believe it or believe it not, is controlled by genes. All right. And lastly, then, on your feet. I'm not asking you to take off your socks and stick your piggies up into the camera. No, thank you very much. But what I do want you to do, when you get a chance, look at your toes. Is your second toe longer than your first one? Is your second toe the longest? Do your feet go like this? Big toe, second toe, and then down. Or is it like that? Is it big toe, smaller toe, and so on? All right. People who have a longer middle toe have a gene that causes that to happen. And then people who don't have it don't have that gene expressed. All right. So now, if you go through those, you should end up with an idea of your genetic profile in only, 6 areas. There's things like freckles, there's other things out there that we could do, things like the ability to taste certain chemicals and so on, but we're not going to get into them, they're too difficult. But these 5, that's plenty, okay? So your widow's peak, your little finger, your earlobe, is it present or not present? Can you roll your tongue? Can you not roll your tongue? Do you have a gap between your front teeth? And on your feet, is your second toe longer than your big toe? Even though we call the big toe, it's because it's the fattest one. But the one beside that, your second toe, is that longer than your first toe? If it is, then you have the gene expressed for that particular condition. Just fill that table in and have a look and see what your genetic profile is, okay? But that's only a snapshot of your genetic profile. There's many, many. In fact, there are hundreds of thousands of genes in the nucleus of your cell, all doing their business to try and make you who you are. The reason why some traits are expressed in one individual and not in another is due to the trait being controlled by a pair of genes. So, for example, you might be able to roll your tongue, the person beside you can't roll their tongue. Why is that? You both have genes for tongue rolling, but because the genes work in pairs, they're kind of in competition with one another. All right? And if you have a gene that is dominant, then you will be able to roll your tongue or have brown eyes or whatever it's going to be. But if your two genes are recessive, then you're not going to be able to do it. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. Take the following set of genes on these two chromosomes. Now take a look at these. Okay, here's one pair of chromosomes out of the 23, and I want you to look at them. All right, I want you just to take a close look at how many pairs of genes are there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's say the top two are controlling the ability to roll your tongue. All right, so you've got a number of examples here. You could have what's called an or situation. That means that you've got the big R from your mother, the big R from your father. You can roll your tongue. Capital letters are used for dominance. Okay, you could have received the tongue rolling gene from dad, but not from mom. You're still going to be able to roll your tongue. But if you got the recessive gene from your dad and the recessive gene from your mom, then you will not be able to roll your tongue. So therefore, there is a 66% chance that people can roll their tongue and a 33% chance that you can't. And if I was in class now, I would ask people to try and roll their tongue and put their hands up if they could. And the amazing thing is that out of the 20 of us in there, 2/3 of us would be able to roll our tongue and 1/3 wouldn't. That the mathematics actually works. Okay, and we'll do that when we get back into class and we'll see if the numbers actually tally. But that's just an example. Now there's an easier example on these chromosomes that I'm going to look at in a moment. I think you can see it. It's the one below that. Can you spot the genes responsible for blue and brown eyes? So just take a quick look at that chromosome. Can you see the ones, and they've color coded them, it's quite easy. Can you see the ones that are responsible for blue and brown eyes? There they are, there. So there's the pair of corresponding genes. Now what does this tell me? Well, if this was mom's chromosome and this was dad's chromosome, what does it tell me? Mom had blue eyes and dad had brown eyes. Now, when they come together, what colour eyes will the baby have? And that depends, again, on what letters the chromosomes and the genes are carrying, okay? Because every gene is given a letter, and we're going to come on to that now in a moment. So, take a look at that. I've just focused in on the blue eye, brown eye part. This one here, as we said already, is from mom, and this one here is from dad. Now, blue eyes, notice, carries a little b, but brown eyes carries a big B. So in a situation like this, if both of these genes were to come together, it's the capital letter that always wins, because the capital letter means dominant. It's the dominant gene, and a dominant gene will always be expressed in the new individual. Whereas the little gene, the little letter, little b, is what we call a recessive gene. And recessive genes aren't, unless there are two recessives together. So if the dominant is present twice or once, it wins. It's only when the dominant is absent that the recessive gene can actually express itself. Okay, so in a situation like this, if this was the genetic makeup of a child on these chromosomes, then I know, for example, that this child would have brown eyes. Okay, so genes, as we said already, are sections of DNA that control a characteristic. All genes are represented by letters. Capital letters represent dominant genes. Now, dominant genes will always be expressed. Okay, whereas little ones are called recessive. They wait in the background. They don't fight with the dominant ones. If a recessive gene pairs off with a dominant, dominant wins. If a recessive gene pairs off with a recessive gene, they both win, and they're able to express themselves. So it's only when you have two recessives together that you're able to express the recessive trait. I hope this is making sense to you. Okay, so dominant genes are always expressed over recessive ones. So if you have two dominants, brilliant. If you have one dominant, one recessive, the dominant wins. If you have one recessive, then they're both expressed. Okay? So let's take a look. Look closer at the eye colour. What do you notice? Well, over here, take a look at these two. What do we notice? A little b, recessive, blue, has been matched with a large b, dominant brown. Now, if dominant brown is paired off with recessive blue, who wins? Brown, exactly. So this child here will have brown eyes, and that's how it works. Okay. So with eye colour, there are blue genes which are recessive, we give them the little b, and brown genes that are dominant, we give them capital B. And they are in the parental gametes. Okay. This gives 3 possible combinations of genes at fertilisation. Now, I want you to think about this carefully. If you have little b genes representing blue eyes, and you have big B genes representing brown eyes, then there are 3 combinations, aren't there? Think about it. You could have a big B with a big B. In other words, dominant brown from mom, dominant brown from dad. You could have dominant brown from mom and recessive blue from dad. Or you could have recessive blue from mom and recessive blue from dad. Now, in this situation, they're the only combinations that can take place at fertilisation. So what does that mean? Brown eyes, because once there's a dominant gene there at all, it's expressed. Now, no dominance, so both of them are recessive, and this child will have blue eyes. And again, we notice mathematically that 67% of the world's population should have brown eyes if brown-eyed parents are producing children, and 33% have a chance of being blue eyes. Okay, so again we notice that there will always be more brown-eyed people than blue-eyed people, for the genetic reason that dominant brown will always be expressed over recessive blue. Okay. Now, there's the combinations. So, mom can give a dominant brown, and dad can give a dominant brown. Mom can give dominant brown, dad can give recessive blue. Mom can give recessive blue, dad can give dominant brown. Mom can give recessive blue, dad gives recessive blue. Outside of that, there's no more. All right. Now, if these are the combinations that come together, what are the potential offspring's eye colour? Well, put 2 B's together. What's the first box? If 2 B's go in, think in your head, what's the first box? And you should have said 2 B's will be brown. Okay. Big B, little b. Dominant brown, recessive blue. Who wins? Dominant brown. Brown eyes again. What happens if we get recessive blue with dominant brown? Still get brown eyes. And lastly, if we get recessive blue and there's no dominance, that's the only way we will have blue eyes. So in this case here, when we take all combinations into situation, we've got 75% brown and 25% blue. That's it. So again, you can do a little bit of mathematics after that. And what that tells me is there will always be far more brown-eyed people in the world than there will be blue-eyed people, for the very simple reason of genetics. Simple as that. Okay. Notice it is the dominant gene that determines the child's eye colour. And I'm going to leave that blank for you to fill in yourselves when you're going back over this yourself, okay? But it is the dominant gene that determines whether it's eye colour, tongue rolling, freckles on your face, longest middle toe, widow's peak, gap in your teeth, whatever it's going to be. It's genes, the dominant gene that decides if that's going to be present in your makeup. Okay, so we're going to move on to Punnett squares. Now, Punnett squares are a lovely way for me to be able to take in information about the gametes and the genes that mom and dad can make, okay? And then at fertilisation to try and figure out what possible genes will be expressed in the new individual. Since adult somatic cells, now please remember that word, a somatic cell is a normal body cell with 46 chromosomes, okay? So since adult somatic cells contain pairs of chromosomes, traits will be written as pairs of letters. So therefore, an adult carrying BB genes can only make BB gametes. Now think about that, okay? If you're carrying 2 dominant B genes, you're going to have brown eyes. Now, when those chromosomes halve, what does that mean? You can only produce capital B genes. So if you halve this, what's the possibility? You'll get a B gene here in this zygote, in this gamete, and a B gene in that gamete. So therefore BB can only make B gametes, okay? And I'll demonstrate that up here in this picture. There it is. So if you have a normal somatic cell, that's a body cell, and you want to produce gametes with half the information, well, when you half BB, what do you get? If you half two capital B's, you get a capital B or a capital B, meaning that this can only produce one type of gamete. Okay, what about an adult who carries big B, little b? Now again, when we make gametes, we half these pairs, we break them in half. So that means that this parent could make B gametes or little b gametes. Now, that means that this parent has the ability to produce brown eyes child or blue eyed child, depending on who their spouse is. Okay, so depending on the genetic makeup of the other parent, it'll depend on how they come together. And let me look at that over here. So again, if you take this somatic cell, normal body cell with pairs of chromosomes, and when that divides into two halves, which are your gametes, this parent, who has brown eyes, by the way, can produce gametes that are brown capital B or blue little b, dominant B or recessive B. And finally, an adult who carries BB, recessive B, or blue genes, well, if you break them in half, you can only get little b gametes, okay? Which means we get a situation like that. So if you have this as your somatic cell, and you have blue eyes, well, then you can only produce recessive B gametes, meaning that your gametes will carry information for blue eyes only. All right, so there are the three possibilities in terms of the body cells dividing and making gametes. Two dominant browns will only make dominant brown gametes. A dominant brown and a recessive blue will make a dominant brown and recessive blue gamete. And lastly, two recessive blue will give rise to recessive blue gametes. Okay, so I hope that's all right. And again, somatic are where the letters appear in pairs, and gametes are where they are individual. A Punnett Square test can be used to see how different parental gametes and genes combine together. So I'm going to give you an example here. A woman with brown eyes and a man with blue eyes are expecting a child. What possible eye colours could the child have? Now, the first thing we've got to remember is this. That represents a normal body somatic cell. And when a somatic cell breaks in half, it can only make these gametes. Okay? So they're the only gametes that she can make. And down here, we have a man carrying two recessive blue genes. Okay? So therefore, that somatic cell with two little b's can only make a B and a B. Now, in a situation like that, what's the only outcome? Well, maybe this particular gene here mixes with this one. What will that give me? BB. Or maybe this one goes with this one here, giving me another BB. Or maybe this one goes with this one, giving me another BB, and this one goes with this one, giving me another BB. Now, what does that mean? That if you have a brown-eyed parent with two dominant brown genes and another blue-eyed parent with two recessive blue genes, all their children will have brown eyes. There's no way that you can actually give rise to a child with blue eyes. So 100% of their offspring will have brown eyes. Okay, that's genetics. That's it in play. All right. Now, that's a little bit messy. So how do we do these things in terms of a diagram? I prefer to use a little kind of a grid, something like this. Okay. You can use this grid if you want. I'm going to show you a grid in the next slide. So you can have, there's the recessive B's. Okay. So this person here can only make B. This person here can only make B. So therefore, the only possible combination in all their children is BB. Big B, little b. That's the only possible combination. All right, let's move on. Let's take this one. A woman with brown eyes. Now notice her genetic makeup. Her genetic makeup now is big B, little b. So that means that she can produce B gametes and little b gametes. So she can produce brown-eyed gametes or blue-eyed gametes. Okay? And a man with brown eyes, again, BB, dominant brown, recessive blue. So what gametes can he make? He can make a brown gamete and a blue gamete. Okay? Are expecting a child. Could their children have blue eyes? Well, let's see. And I'm going to make a table this time. All right? The woman who has BB, as we said already, dominant B and recessive B, can make two types of genes. She can make a dominant B brown gamete and a recessive blue gamete. Okay? The man can do exactly the same thing. So here's the table. Here's what we call a Punnett Square. Okay? We take the male gametes and we put them across the top line like this. And then we take the female gametes and we put them down the side. And in the boxes then, underneath each one's, at the intersection, we simply bring the letters together. All right. Now maybe I should draw that out for you first before I actually show you the diagram. Let me just show you how I would do it here. Let me go back a bit. Take that table out. Okay, let's just take that out. So let's say we've got a table like this. Okay, there it is. And you've got this one here. You've got the male and you've got the female. Okay. Now the male can make two gametes and the female can make two gametes. Apologise, that's why I always print these things out. I can't draw for peanuts with this pen. Anyway, what are the male gametes? The male gametes, go up to the man. The male gametes are either B, big B, or little b. So put them in there. Big B or little b. What are the female gametes? The female gametes go down the side. Big B or little b. Now, in the spaces left, you simply combine the letters that intersect in that space. So if we go to this space here, what do we notice? This is big B, big B. Brown-eyed child. Okay, let's go to the next one. Big B, little b. Brown-eyed child. Down here, big B, little b. Brown-eyed child. Hold on a second. Look at the last one. The last square is little b, which means that they could have a blue-eyed child. Now, if they had 4 children, mathematically speaking, what would the percentage probability be that we would have a blue-eyed child? Well, 3/4 of them, or 75%, would brown eyes. There's a 75% chance of the child having a brown eyes, and there is a 25% chance of the child having blue eyes. So to answer the question, could their child have blue eyes? Absolutely. There's a 25% chance that this child, who will be the offspring of a woman with dominant brown and recessive blue, and a man with dominant brown and recessive blue genes, there will be a 25% chance that they'll give rise to a child with blue eyes. Okay, so can 2 brown-eyed parents have a blue-eyed child? Yes, if the genes combine recessive blue with recessive blue. Now there's only a 25% chance of that actually happening. Now what is it? That's the table there. Much easier to understand, far better, but you're going to have to draw these out if you're asked to do them. So the male gametes are big B, little b. The female gametes are big B, little b. And into the squares that are there, in the intersections, you put both letters, the one above and the one to the left. Okay, so as I said already, 25% chance of a child with blue eyes. Let's take another example. A woman with brown eyes, she's carrying dominant brown and recessive blue. Okay, they're the genes that she carries. Now, what gametes does she make? She makes a dominant brown gamete and a recessive blue gamete. And a man with brown eyes, who is dominant brown, so he can only make this. He can make large B's only. Okay, are expecting a child. Could their child have blue eyes? Well, again, let's take a look at what gametes they make. The gametes of the mother are a B dominant and a B recessive. The gametes of the father are a B dominant and a B dominant. Okay, now take both of those sets of genes and put them into the Punnett Square. So put the male gametes across the top, the 2 big B's, put the female gametes along the side, big B, little b, and into the spaces combine the letters, the one above and the one to the left. So big B, little b in here, big B, little b there, big B, little b here, and big B, little b in the corner. So could their child have blue eyes? Well, let's check and see what the children could have. Dominant brown, that's brown. Okay, brown, brown, brown. Can their child have blue eyes? No. So even though the woman is carrying genetic information for blue eyes, because the father is not carrying that information, blue eyes won't be expressed because it's recessive and it is surrounded by dominant brown genes. Okay, so it ain't going to be expressed. So in this case, no blue-eyed children are possible. Okay, I want you to try this. I'm going to ask you to pause this video now, read what's on the slide, and see if you can work out the answers. I'm going to go through the answers in a moment, but I need you to pause the video now, try them in your copy, and then see if you get your answers correct. So pause and off you go. Now, here's the answers, just in case you're wondering whether you've got them correct or not. Bob can roll his tongue as he has or genes. Okay, now let's talk about Bob for a moment. Bob has or. What does that mean? The gametes that he will make are capital R, which allows the rolling of the tongue, and little r. Okay, so they're his possible gametes. Okay, his wife Sally cannot roll her tongue as she has or genes. Okay, so therefore what gametes will she make? She'll make little r and little r. Now, what percentage of the children will be able to roll their tongue? So keep in mind that big R means you can do it. If you have big R anywhere, you can roll your tongue. So here's the questions we go through when we're asking ourselves. What are Bob's possible gametes? So we have them up there. Bob's possible gametes are R and R. Okay. Sally's possible gametes are little r and little r. Now, design a Punnett square to see all possible genetic combinations. Okay. And again, forgive me for my diagrams on this, because it's a very slippy surface. So we have like that. We're going to put the male and female in. So we're going to put the male across the top and the female down the side. So we've got two gametes from the father and two gametes from the mother. Okay, so what are the father's gametes? Bob's gametes are big R, little r. What are Sally's gametes? Little r, little r. Okay, now into the squares that are left, let's bring the letters that are above and to the left. So in this square here, what do we get? Big R, R. The child is a tongue roller. Okay, next one is what? Little r, little r. Okay, that child will not be able to roll its tongue. Next one, we get big R, little r. That child is the tongue roller. And lastly, we get little r with little r. So, what if they had 4 children? What would the distribution be in terms of tongue rolling? Well, here's what we notice. Half, see that? Half of the children would be able to roll their tongue. So you get 2 out of 4 which can roll their tongue and 2 out of 4 which can't. So therefore, in this case, there will be a 50% chance of being able to roll their tongue. And the other 50% won't. So if they have 6 kids, 3 may be able to roll their tongue and 3 won't. Now, it doesn't fall down that line, unfortunately, because there's a little bit of randomness in there too. But that's mathematically what we would expect, that half of their children should be able to roll their tongues. Okay, so they're quite an easy thing to do once you get used to them. Okay, so there's the Punnett square that I've designed for you there, and I want you to fill it in again. If you haven't done it the first time around, you can go and do it now and work it out again. So, at the end of this lesson, what have we learned? We've learned that all traits are controlled by genes. Okay, in normal body cells, genes come together in pairs. The genes have letters. If the letter is capital, the gene is dominant and expressed. If the letter is small case, the gene is recessive and it's not expressed. Okay, the only way that you can get a recessive gene to express itself is if it's paired off with another small case letter. So the only time a recessive gene will be actually demonstrated in the human body is when you have 2 small case letters together. Okay, we then understand that in order to try and work out what the possible genetic makeup of offspring could be, that we use what's called a Punnett square. So we take the normal setup of the pairs of genes in the mother and father, we see what potential gametes they can make, we list the paternal gametes on the top and the maternal gametes at the side, and we bring them together and we combine them in what's called a Punnett square test. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, just in order to revise all that and to get ready for the live class. I'm not going to have live class today, obviously. I'm going to have live class on Tuesday morning, because I think we need to go through a meaty amount of this before you may have questions to ask me. So between now and Tuesday, I'm going to ask you to go to page 135 of your textbook and attempt all the questions in the KC and in the K and U sections, the first 2 sections of those questions. Answer all the bits that are in there. And when you're finished that, I want you to do a little bit of research. Now, I know you've done research on asexual and sexual reproduction. I'll come back to that on Tuesday. But I also want you to research this about diseases. Some diseases are caused by the absence of genes that are normally present. Find out what diseases are caused in this way, and for one of these diseases, outline how the study of genetics helps us to understand the nature of the disease and how it may be inherited. Now, if you do a Google search, you're going to get a huge amount of third level education stuff, which is very difficult. What I would suggest is, when you're doing a search and you want to keep the science simple, always put the word kids at the end of your search, okay? Because what it does then is it throws back the sites that are easy to read and have nice diagrams and don't use very flowery language. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with that. We'll take all these answers back, plus, or all these questions back, plus the ones we had the last day in Tuesday's live class.